All things being equal, it's pretty obvious what my favorite fishing platform is, and that's my Phoenix 721. But there are a lot of situations where I can't put the big boat into. I've got access to a lot of great ponds around town here, including the one I live on, and you need a smaller boat for that, and a lot of them are electric only. So I've been fishing out of a 1754 aluminum for a while now, and I recently decided to upgrade to a little bit bigger boat, a little bit wider, and went to an 1860. Of course, you can see it comes pretty basic. There's nothing on it, so we've got a little bit of rigging to do. So over the next few weeks, I'll walk you through all the add-ons to it and what it takes to get it set up as a perfect pond boat. This week I'm going to show you how we go about installing the trolling motor. Normally you'd mount the trolling motor on the left side. This is done because most of the driving's on the right side of the boat and it's out of the visibility line there and the least amount of interference. But in my case, this boat sits in the water a lot of times at my dock, and I get tied up on the left side because that's where my power is for the battery charger. So we don't want to mount it that way because the trolling motor would bang up against the dock a lot. We've got a couple of different options. First of all, we can mount it on the left side, just exactly opposite what it would normally be mounted, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with this approach. Gets it out of the way, puts the head of the trolling motor on the outside way to the lake, and since we're not using a big motor, it doesn't matter about visibility. But we're going to do something a little different and a little more unusual, and that is we're going to mount it straight on. The reason I want to do this is this gets the thrust straight down the center line of the boat, and it makes it a little easier to steer. One of the first things you notice about these boats with no motor on them is that they tend to windmill in the wind. Makes it a little harder to keep the boat lined up straight, and this will help out without a good bit. First thing we want to do is get the mount where we think we want it. We want it running straight down the center line, and of course the trolling motor shaft actually runs a little off center in this bracket, so the bracket's going to sit a little bit to the right. The other thing we want to do is make sure the front of it overhangs the very tip of the bow. That way when you're lifting the trolling motor up, the trolling motor catches on the plastic that's designed for that and doesn't bang off the aluminum. I also need to make sure that the overhang in the back is not so far back that it interferes with the recessed trolling motor control that we're going to put in down the line. In this case, you can see that the boat slopes up and it actually gives it just about the right amount of clearance. Now there are multiple holes down the inside of this bracket, so you can pick where you want to mount it, but you also want to make sure that when your mountain boats go through, you've got plenty of space for that. Now that I've got everything set exactly how I want it, I'm going to mark the outside of the bracket in a couple of different places. This will just give me some alignment points if I happen to knock it out of line when I open the bracket up. Okay, we got the bracket right where we want it, so we're going to go in here and mark some holes so we can come back and drill it. We can use as many holes as we want, but 4 is typically enough to keep it in place. But what I want to do is mark the farthest apart holes I possibly can so that we've got as much stability as we can get. Okay, we've got our holes marked. Now we've got to move the bracket out of the way and do the hard part, drill some holes in a brand new boat. Motorguide comes with a pretty good system for mounting their trolling motors. They come with these rubber isolators, and the way it works is you drill a hole the size of this arm through the top cap of the boat, and it sits flat. You drop the screw through, and there's a built-in nut in the bottom. When you tighten it up, the rubber spreads out, adheres to the bottom of the top cap, and keeps a tight seal on it. Now, they work pretty good, but in fact, when the rubber begins to deteriorate down the line, you'll have to tighten them again, and eventually the rubber will break entirely and this nut will just turn freely. So what I do to avoid that problem is I'm going to cut it off at the top part, so we're still using the little rubber at the top, and then underneath I'm going to put a fender washer and an elastic stop nut, which will keep it from ever backing off. You may occasionally have to tighten it up if you do a lot of trailering, but most of the time these will hold for years without ever having to be moved. Before you drill your holes, you'll first of all make sure they're in the correct place. Second of all, you want to make sure what's underneath them. Make sure you're not drilling into anything important. Now once we get the holes drilled, I'm going to take the shop vac, clean up all these little aluminum shavings so none of the pets or anybody walking barefoot doesn't end up with one of them in their foot. Okay, I've got my holes drilled. I've got the bottoms cut off the isolators and ready to put it together and put it in place. Now you'll notice that the holes are off center in the top of these isolators, and what that is there's a narrow edge which is designed to go toward the outside and the wider edge toward the inside of the bracket, and that lines everything up perfectly with the brackets. One tip that'll make it a little bit easier, you know which holes you're using, go ahead and put your screws on, run your isolators up on there, and then you can just drop it, the 4 bolts in the hole, and you'll be ready to go. Okay, we've got all our isolators and screws through. If we drilled the holes correctly, we should be able to just set it in place, and then we can lock it down. There we go. Okay, we got the screws tightened down, and it went pretty well. Minimal amount of cussing, no blood loss, no fingers lost, no trips to the ER, so it's a successful project any way you look at it. But it's mounted. You want to make sure when you tighten those screws, you get them nice and even. Don't tighten one side more than the other, or the bracket will twist. You won't be able to open it. It's easy to test. Just give it a little tug. As long as it opens up and closes back, then you've got it level and you're set to go. Be sure and check back next week, and I'll have a video posted on putting the batteries in and running the wire to the front.